The stagecoach lurched violently, throwing Clara Whitmore against the hard wooden side panel. Dust billowed through the cracked windows, coating everything in a fine layer of Arizona grit. She pressed a lace handkerchief to her nose, trying to filter the air that tasted of alkali and desperation. 3 weeks of travel from Boston had brought her to this, a bone-rattling journey through a landscape that seemed determined to strip away every vestige of civilization she'd ever known. "Mercy's Bend! Next stop!" the driver hollered from above, his voice barely audible over the groaning wheels and creaking leather. Clara smoothed her traveling dress, now hopelessly wrinkled and stained despite her best efforts. The navy wool that had seemed so practical in Boston now felt suffocating in the desert heat. She touched the mourning brooch at her throat, Edward's portrait sealed behind glass, a reminder of the typhoid that had taken him 18 months ago, a reminder of why she was here, about to become a mail-order bride to a man she'd never met. The other passengers, a grizzled prospector and a salesman with pomaded hair, avoided her gaze. She'd grown accustomed to it. A young widow traveling alone to the territories raised eyebrows and questions she had no desire to answer. The stagecoach shuddered to a halt, and Clara peered through the grimy window at Mercy's Bend. Her heart sank. The photograph Silas Manning had sent with his letters had been generous, to say the least. The thriving town consisted of a single dusty street lined with false-fronted buildings that looked ready to blow away in the next strong wind. Dogs lay panting in whatever shade they could find. A few horses stood hip-shot at hitching posts, their heads hanging low in the oppressive heat. "Ma'am," the driver appeared at the door, offering a calloused hand. "This is your stop." Clara accepted his help, stepping down into air so hot it felt like opening an oven door. The sun blazed overhead, a merciless white disk in a sky bleached of color. She stood beside her trunk and carpet bag, watching the stagecoach disappear in a cloud of dust, taking with it her last connection to the world she knew. "Mrs. Whitmore." She turned to find a man approaching, tall, thin, with sandy hair already receding, though he couldn't be more than 35. His clothes were clean but worn, his boots polished but cracked. This was Silas Manning, the rancher who'd promised her a life of comfort and respectability in his letters. "Mr. Manning?" She extended her gloved hand, which he shook briefly before dropping it as if it burned. "Just Silas, ma'am. No need for formalities out here." His pale blue eyes skittered over her, never quite meeting her gaze. "You're younger than your letters suggested. I'm 26, as I wrote." Clara kept her voice level, though unease prickled along her spine. "And you're exactly as you described," which was true, if one ignored the way he seemed to shrink into himself, or how his Adam's apple bobbed nervously when he swallowed. In his letters, he'd seemed confident, established. In person, he reminded her of a scarecrow that had learned to walk. "Well then," Silas cleared his throat. "I've got the wagon. Ranch is about 2 hours out. We can... That is, Reverend Morrison is expecting us tomorrow for the ceremony." The word hung between them like something shameful. Clara had known this wouldn't be a love match. She'd been clear about that in her own letters. She needed security and a fresh start. He needed a wife to help run his household and provide respectability. Yet, standing here in the brutal sun, looking at this stranger who wouldn't meet her eyes, the transaction felt more cold and commercial than she'd prepared for. "Of course," she managed to smile. "Shall we?" Silas loaded her belongings with surprising efficiency, though he was careful never to touch her, even accidentally. The wagon was well maintained but sparse. No cushions on the hard bench, no cover from the sun. Clara climbed up, arranging her skirts as best she could. The ride was largely silent. Silas occasionally pointed out landmarks: Table Mesa, Skull Creek, places with names that spoke of violence and death. The landscape was unlike anything Clara had imagined. In Boston, she'd pictured the West as endless grasslands with the occasional picturesque mountain. This was desolation made manifest, red rock and gray sage, twisted Joshua trees and expanses of nothing but dust and stone. It's quite different from Massachusetts, she ventured. Takes getting used to. Silas agreed. But it's good land. Honest land. Makes a man work for everything he's got. And a woman? He glanced at her sideways, seeming puzzled by the question. Woman's got her own work? House needs keeping. Meals need cooking. Garden needs tending. Though nothing grows without a fight out here. Clara nodded, though her heart sank further. In his letters, he'd mentioned wanting a helpmate and companion. Now she understood he meant someone to cook and clean. Nothing more. They were perhaps an hour from town when it happened. A sharp crack split the air, and the wagon lurched sickeningly to one side. Silas cursed, the first emotion she'd seen from him. Wheels cracked, he muttered, climbing down to inspect the damage. Damn dry rot. Clara sat in the tilting wagon, parasol providing scant protection from the sun. Sweat trickled down her spine, soaking through her corset. She was contemplating climbing down to find shade when she heard the sound of approaching hoofbeats. A rider appeared from behind a cluster of red rocks, moving with an easy grace that spoke of years in the saddle. As he drew closer, Clara felt her breath catch. This was no town-bred rancher like Silas. This was something else entirely. The man was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in worn leather and faded cotton. His skin was bronzed by sun and wind. His hair black as midnight and worn longer than fashion dictated. But it was his face that held her transfixed, sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw, and eyes so dark they seemed to hold depths of shadow. There was something in those eyes, a wildness carefully controlled, that made her pulse quicken. Trouble? The stranger's voice was deep, roughened like everything else in this hard land. Silas straightened, and Clara saw his shoulders tense. Wheels cracked. We'll manage. The stranger's gaze moved to Clara, and she felt the weight of it like a physical touch. Something flickered in those dark eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition of a kindred loneliness. Then his expression shuddered, becoming unreadable. 2 hours to town with a cracked wheel, 3 to the Manning place. He swung down from his horse in one fluid motion. Sun'll kill her before you make it. The lady is my concern, Silas said stiffly. Your concern's about to have heat stroke. The stranger was already examining the wheel, running brown hands over the damaged wood. Got rope in your wagon? Silas nodded reluctantly. The stranger, she noticed he wore a gun low on his hip, the holster tied down in a way that suggested familiarity with violence, set about fashioning a temporary repair with swift efficiency. Clara watched his hands work, noticed the scars crisscrossing his knuckles, the easy strength in his movements. When he glanced up and caught her staring, she didn't look away. Something passed between them in that moment, a recognition that transcended the boundaries of propriety and reason. You're Jesse Redhawk, Silas said, and there was something in his tone that made Clara look at him sharply. I am. Jesse continued working, not looking up. Didn't know you were back in these parts. Job brought me through. He tested the repair, seemed satisfied. This'll hold to your place, but get it fixed proper. Wood's too dry out here to take chances. He stood, dusting his hands on worn chaps. When he looked at Clara again, something in his expression had changed. A wall had gone up, deliberate and impenetrable. Ma'am. He touched the brim of his hat, a gesture that should have been polite, but somehow felt like goodbye. Manning. He swung back onto his horse with that same fluid grace and was gone, disappearing into the landscape as if he'd never been. Who was that? Clara asked, her voice not quite steady. Silas climbed back onto the wagon bench, his jaw set. Nobody you need concern yourself with. Man like that, he's got no place in civilized society. But as they resumed their journey, Clara found herself looking back, searching the empty horizon for a rider who'd already vanished. Her heart still raced, her skin still tingled where his gaze had touched her. She'd come west for safety, for the security of a respectable marriage to a gentle rancher. But in one brief encounter, A man with Apache blood and dangerous eyes had stolen her breath, and quite possibly her peace of mind. The wagon rolled on through the desolate beauty of the desert, carrying her toward a future that suddenly felt far less certain than it had just moments before. Jesse Redhawk sat motionless on the ridge, watching the dust trail from Manning's wagon disappear into the distance. The woman's face lingered in his mind, pale skin flushed by heat, green eyes wide with something between fear and fascination. A lady from back east, clearly. Another fool come to find paradise in hell. He touched the medicine bag at his chest, feeling the worn leather against his fingers. His grandmother would have called it fate. This meeting. But Jesse had learned long ago that fate was just another word for trouble. The horse beneath him shifted, eager to move. Jesse patted the animal's neck and turned away from the vanishing wagon. He had work to do, tracks to follow, men to find. The Kellerman Ranch had lost 20 head of cattle last week, and they were paying good money for their return. It was honest work, mostly, better than some things he'd done to survive. As he rode, memories stirred like dust devils in his mind. His mother's face, beautiful despite the bruises. The smell of smoke as their wickiup burned, the screams that had followed him into manhood, echoing in dreams that left him reaching for his gun. He'd been 8 when the soldiers came, old enough to remember, too young to fight. His mother had hidden him in the rocks, made him promise to stay silent no matter what he heard. He'd kept that promise, even when her screams tore through the desert air, even when the silence that followed was worse. The trader who found him 3 days later said he was lucky. Lucky to be half white, lucky to look more like his father than his mother, lucky to be young enough to civilize. Jesse spat into the dust. 22 years later, he still wasn't civilized, not by their standards. He'd learned their language, their ways, even spent time in their schools before escaping back to the desert. But he walked between worlds, accepted fully by neither, trusted by none. The tracks he followed led toward Mercy's Bend, which meant the rustlers were either very stupid or very bold. Jesse suspected both. He'd heard whispers in the Mexican cantinas across the border, Comancheros moving north, testing boundaries, looking for easy targets. By sunset, he'd made camp in a hollow between red rocks, far enough from the town to avoid notice, but close enough to ride in if needed. As darkness fell, he sat by his small fire, cleaning his rifle with practiced motions. The woman's face returned unbidden. Clara, he'd heard Manning use the name. She didn't belong here any more than a butterfly belonged in a scorpion's nest. Yet there'd been steel in her spine when she'd met his gaze, a refusal to look away that spoke of hidden strength. Jesse shook his head. Not his concern. He'd learned the hard way what happened when Apache blood mixed with white dreams. His mother had loved a white man once, believed his promises. It had destroyed her. 3 days later, Jesse rode into Mercy's Bend with information about the rustlers, the sheriff, a fat man named Holcomb who spent more time in the saloon than his office, barely looked up from his poker game. Comancheros, you say? Holcomb belched. Well, they ain't hit nothing in my jurisdiction. Let the ranchers hire more guns if they're worried. Jesse left in disgust. The law in Mercy's Bend was as useful as a chocolate teapot. He'd warn the ranchers himself, collect his finder's fee, and move on. It was what he always did. But first, supplies. The general store was run by a German named Muller who didn't care about a man's blood as long as his money was good. Jesse was examining ammunition when the bell above the door chimed. She walked in like sunrise breaking over the desert, sudden and inevitable. Clara Manning. Though he supposed she wasn't Manning yet. Her green dress was simpler than what she'd worn before, but she still looked like she'd stepped out of a painting rather than the dust and grit of Mercy's Bend. Their eyes met across the store. Color rose in her cheeks, but she didn't look away. Mrs. Manning. Muller called out, "Your order is ready. Soon to be Mrs. Manning," she corrected softly, moving to the counter. "The ceremony is tomorrow." Jesse turned back to the ammunition, but he was acutely aware of her presence, the rustle of her skirts, the soft cadence of her voice as she thanked Muller. He should leave, now, before... Mr. Redhawk? He turned slowly. She stood closer than propriety allowed, close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her green eyes. "I wanted to thank you for helping with the wagon. No need." Nevertheless, she tilted her head, studying him with a directness that was decidedly improper. "Silas says you're a bounty hunter. I find things, cattle, horses, sometimes men, and you're good at it." Still breathing, a smile ghosted across her lips. "I suppose that's recommendation enough out here?" She paused, seeming to gather courage. "I also heard you saved the Baxter girl from drowning last spring." Jessie shrugged. "She fell in the river. I was passing by." "And the fire at the mission school? They say you went back 3 times to get the children out." "People say a lot of things." "Yes," she said quietly. "They do." Something in her tone made him look at her more closely. There were shadows under her eyes, a tension in her shoulders that spoke of sleepless nights. "Manning treating you right?" The question escaped before he could stop it. Her eyes widened slightly. "He's very proper. A gentleman." The words were correct, but something in her voice suggested they tasted like ash. Jessie knew he should end this conversation. Walk away. Mount his horse and ride until Mercy's Bend was just another ghost town in his memory. Instead, he heard himself saying, "There's word of Comancheros moving north, raiders from across the border. Manning's place is isolated. Silas says we're too small to bother with, that they only hit the big spreads." "Silas is wrong." She absorbed this quietly. "What should we do?" "Keep guns loaded, stay together after dark, watch for dust clouds where there shouldn't be any." He paused. "And if trouble comes, don't hesitate. Men like that see hesitation as weakness. I've never shot a gun." "Then learn." They stood in silence for a moment, the air between them charged with unspoken words. Muller cleared his throat loudly, reminding them where they were. "I should go," Clara said. "Silas is waiting." Jessie touched his hat brim, the gesture he'd used before, but this time, their eyes held a moment longer than they should have. After she left, Muller chuckled. "Pretty woman, shame about Manning." "What do you mean? You ain't heard? Man's colder than a well-digger's boots. Last wife died of loneliness, they say. Just wasted away out on that ranch with no one to talk to but the chickens." Jessie paid for his ammunition and left without comment, but the information gnawed at him as he rode out to warn the other ranchers. Clara, with her Eastern manners and hidden fire, trapped on a remote ranch with a man who saw her as furniture. It wasn't his problem. Couldn't be his problem. That night, the Comancheros hit the Martinez Ranch 10 miles south. By the time Jessie arrived, drawn by the smoke, it was over. The house was ashes. Old man Martinez and his sons were dead. The women. Jessie buried what he found and rode hard for Mercy's Bend. Sheriff Holcomb actually bestirred himself this time, organizing a posse, but Jessie knew they were already too late. The raiders would have melted back across the border, leaving only death in their wake. "They'll be back," Jessie told the gathered men. "This was just a test. They'll hit again. Harder. Then we'll be ready," Holcomb blustered. Jessie doubted it, but he made his rounds anyway, warning every ranch within a day's ride. When he finally approached the Manning spread, the sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of blood and gold. The house was modest but well kept, with glass windows, a luxury in these parts. Smoke rose from the chimney, and Jessie could smell bread baking. Something in his chest tightened at the domestic scene. Silas met him at the door, rifle in hand. "Red Hawk, what's your business?" "Comancheros hit the Martinez place last night. Figured you should know." Silas paled. "How bad?" "Bad enough." Come in. Clara should hear this too." The interior was sparse but clean. Clara emerged from the kitchen, wiping flour from her hands. She'd changed into a simple calico dress, her hair pinned up loosely. She looked younger, softer, but the steel was still there in her spine. "Mr. Red Hawk." Her voice was carefully neutral, but her eyes asked questions. Jesse told them about the raid, keeping the worst details to himself. Clara listened without flinching, though her knuckles whitened where she gripped her apron. "What do you recommend?" she asked when he finished. "Join up with other ranches. There's safety in numbers." "Can't do that," Silas said immediately. "Got stock to tend, responsibilities here. Then arm yourselves, keep watches at night, and if you see dust where it shouldn't be, ride for town hard." "Will you stay for supper?" Clara asked suddenly. "As thanks for the warning." Silas stiffened. "Clara, I don't think it's the least we can do." Her tone was mild, but Jesse heard the steel beneath. "Unless Mr. Red Hawk has other obligations." He should say yes. Should invent pressing business elsewhere. Instead, "I'm obliged." The meal was tense. Silas glowered while Clara made small talk about her journey west, the differences between Arizona and Massachusetts. Jesse found himself responding more than he intended, drawn out by her genuine curiosity about the land and its ways. "You know this country well," she observed. "Born to it. Your mother was Apache." Silas's fork clattered against his plate. "That's not fit dinner conversation. I was merely curious." "Well, don't be." Silas stood abruptly. "Thank you for the warning. Red Hawk, I trust you can see yourself out." Jesse rose, reading the signs, but as he moved toward the door, Clara followed. "I apologize for Silas. I didn't mean offense. None taken." She glanced back toward the kitchen where Silas had disappeared, then stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Is it true what they say, that you can track anything across this desert?" "Why?" I want to understand this place, to survive it." Jesse studied her face in the lamplight. "The desert doesn't care about understanding. It only respects strength. Then I'll have to be strong." "You already are." The words hung between them. Clara's lips parted slightly, and Jesse found himself leaning closer, drawn by something stronger than wisdom. "Clara," Silas's voice shattered the moment. "The dishes won't wash themselves?" Jesse stepped back, touching his hat. "Ma'am." He left quickly, but her eyes followed him into the darkness. As he mounted his horse, he heard Silas's voice through the thin walls, sharp with anger. Jesse's hands tightened on the reins, but he forced himself to ride away. Not his problem, not his place. He'd given his warning. Whatever happened next was on their heads. But as he made camp under the cold stars, Jesse couldn't shake the image of Green Eyes asking questions he didn't dare answer, or the certainty that Clara Whitmore was headed for a different kind of death than what the Comancheros might bring, the slow strangulation of the spirit that came from a loveless life in an unforgiving land. He'd seen it before. He'd be damned if he'd watch it again. The night they came, Clara was alone in the kitchen, kneading bread for the morning. Silas had ridden to town for supplies, insisting the warnings were overblown. "Red Hawk's trying to drum up business," he'd said, "making folks scared so they'll hire him for protection." The first sign was the dogs falling silent. Clara's hands stilled in the dough as she noticed the absence of their usual barking. Then came the sound of horses. Too many horses for honest travelers at this hour. Her heart hammered as she moved to the window. Dark shapes materialized from the desert like demons spawned from nightmare. Comancheros. At least 6 of them. Faces hidden behind scraps of cloth. Weapons glinting in the moonlight. Clara's hands shook as she reached for Silas's rifle above the door. She'd practiced loading it, but her fingers fumbled with the cartridges. Through the window, she saw them dismounting, spreading out to surround the house. A boot crashed against the door. Clara raised the rifle, remembering Jesse's words. "Don't hesitate!" The door splintered inward. She fired, the recoil nearly knocking her down. The man in the doorway clutched his shoulder, cursing in Spanish, but others were already pushing past him. Clara tried to reload, but rough hands seized the rifle, tearing it away. She struck out with her fists, her nails, fighting with desperate fury. A backhand sent her sprawling, stars exploding across her vision. "Bonita!" One of them laughed, reaching for her. Clara scrambled backward, her hand closing on a kitchen knife. She slashed wildly, feeling it connect. hearing another curse, but there were too many. They backed her into a corner, their eyes glittering with cruel anticipation. The window exploded in a shower of glass. Jesse Redhawk came through like an avenging spirit, his guns speaking death. 2 men fell before the others even registered his presence. Clara saw him move with lethal grace, every motion precise, economical, deadly. A raider lunged at her, using her as a shield. Jesse's eyes met hers for a split second, dark, wild, burning with something primal. Then his gun spoke again, the bullet passing so close to her ears she felt its heat. The man behind her collapsed. The remaining Comancheros tried to flee. Jesse followed them into the yard, and Clara heard more shots, more screams, then silence, broken only by her own ragged breathing. Jesse reappeared in the doorway, blood on his shirt, not his own. His eyes swept the room, cataloging threats, before focusing on her. The wildness was still there, barely leashed. "You hurt?" Clara tried to speak. Couldn't. She shook her head. He crossed to her in 3 strides, his hands gentle as they checked her for injuries. She was dimly aware that she was shaking, that tears were streaming down her face. When he pulled her against his chest, she didn't resist. "It's done," he murmured into her hair. "You're safe." She breathed in his scent, leather and gunpowder and sage. His arms were solid, real, the only things keeping her anchored as reaction set in. She'd almost died. Those men would have... "We need to go," Jesse said. "Others might come." Clara pulled back, suddenly aware of their proximity. "Silas." "Won't be back before dawn. I passed him in town, deep in a poker game." Something flickered in Jesse's eyes. "Left you alone out here, even after the warning." "Where would we go?" "I know a place. Safe, hidden." He gathered ammunition from the fallen raiders. Movements efficient. "Get what you need. We ride in 5 minutes." Clara didn't argue. She threw essentials into a carpet bag. Clothes, her few precious books, Edward's portrait. When she emerged, Jesse had 2 horses ready. "Can you ride?" "I'll manage." The desert at night was a different world, silver and shadow under a crescent moon. Jesse led them away from established trails, through arroyos and over ridges, moving with the certainty of one who knew every stone. Clara clung to the saddle horn, trusting his guidance. They rode for hours, until Clara's world narrowed to the rhythm of hoofbeats and the broad back of the man ahead. Finally, Jesse turned into what looked like solid rock face. Only when they were almost upon it did Clara see the narrow opening. The canyon beyond was like something from a fairy tale. High walls that blocked the wind, a small spring creating an oasis of green, ancient petroglyphs dancing on the stone, a shelter of rocks and branches blended so perfectly with the landscape she almost missed it. "Apache hideout," Jesse explained, helping her dismount. Her legs nearly buckled. "My grandmother's people used it for generations." He built a small fire, its light flickering over the canyon walls. Clara sat close to the flames, trying to stop shaking. The events of the night seemed surreal, like something from a dime novel. But the blood on Jesse's shirt was real. The ache in her jaw where she'd been struck was real. "Here." Jesse pressed a cup into her hands. Coffee, bitter and strong. "It'll help." Clara sipped, welcoming the burn. "How did you know?" "Didn't, not for certain." He settled across from her, his face unreadable in the firelight. "But I couldn't shake the feeling. Been watching the house." "Watching?" "Making rounds, checking." He shrugged. "Manning shouldn't have left you alone." "I'm not his responsibility yet. We're not..." The ceremony was delayed. The Reverend was called away. Jesse's jaw tightened. "You're under his protection. That should mean something." They sat in silence. The fire crackled. Somewhere in the darkness, a coyote called. "I killed a man tonight," Clara said quietly. "With a knife. I felt it go in. You survived. That's what matters." "Is it?" She looked at him directly. "Is surviving enough? Out here, it's everything. Your mother didn't survive." The words hung between them like a blade. Jesse went very still. "I'm sorry." Clara began, but he held up a hand. No, you're right. He stared into the fire. She survived the raid, survived what they did to her. But the shame killed her in the end. Took poison rather than live with a half-breed child. Jesse, I was 3. Old enough to remember her face. Not old enough to understand why she looked at me with such hate. His voice was flat, emotionless. The Apache took me in, but I was never really one of them. Too white. The whites who rescued me. Tried to civilize me. I was never one of them either. Too Indian. Clara moved without thinking, crossing to sit beside him. I'm sorry. Don't be. Made me strong. Taught me to rely on nobody but myself. That's a lonely way to live. Better than the alternative. She touched his hand where it rested on his knee. He tensed, but didn't pull away. Thank you, she said, for saving my life. You were doing pretty well on your own. That knife work wasn't bad. I was terrified. Fear keeps you alive. It's when you stop being afraid that you're in trouble. His hand turned under hers, fingers intertwining. Clara knew she should pull away. This was madness, sitting in a hidden canyon with a man who wasn't her fiancé, their hands linked like lovers. What happens tomorrow? She asked. I take you back. Manning raises hell about the raid. Maybe they send out a posse. Maybe not. Life goes on. And you? I move on. Always do. Why? He looked at her then, his eyes reflecting the firelight. You know why. She did. The space between them crackled with awareness, with possibilities that could never be. Clara was acutely conscious of his nearness, the warmth radiating from his body, the calluses on his palm where it pressed against hers. I should have stayed in Boston, she whispered. Why didn't you? Everyone there knew me as Edward's widow. Poor Clara, so young to lose a husband. They meant well, but I was suffocating. I thought I could start fresh here, be someone new. And instead I'm about to marry a man who sees me as an unpaid housekeeper, who left me alone despite warnings of danger, who looks at me like I'm a chair he ordered from a catalog. Then don't marry him. With what choice? I have no money, no connections here, a woman alone in this territory. She laughed bitterly. You've seen what happens to women alone? Jessie's free hand rose to cup her face, thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. You're stronger than you know. I don't feel strong. You fought tonight. Didn't freeze, didn't give up. That's strength. She leaned into his touch, knowing she was crossing a line but unable to stop herself. Jessie, he kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It was fierce, desperate, tasting of coffee and danger and forbidden desire. Clara gasped, and he swallowed the sound, pulling her closer, her hands fisted in his shirt as years of proper behavior, of careful restraint, shattered like glass. This was nothing like Edward's respectful pecks or Silas's awkward distance. This was fire and need, two souls recognizing something essential in each other. Jessie's hands tangled in her hair, pins scattering. Clara pressed closer, wanting to crawl inside his skin, to lose herself in this moment. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Jessie's eyes were wild. The careful control finally shattered. Clara? She silenced him with another kiss. Softer this time, but no less intense. When it ended, she rested her forehead against his. Don't, she said. Don't tell me why this is wrong. I know why it's wrong. Just let me have this moment. He held her as the fire died to embers, as the stars wheeled overhead. Neither spoke of tomorrow, of the impossibility of what had passed between them. In this hidden canyon, in this stolen moment, they simply existed, two damaged souls finding temporary shelter in each other. When dawn painted the canyon walls rose and gold, Jessie stirred. We should go. Clara nodded, already feeling the weight of reality settling back on her shoulders. They broke camp in silence, erasing signs of their presence with practiced efficiency. The ride back was torture. Each mile that brought them closer to the Manning Ranch took them further from the magic of the night. By the time they crested the ridge overlooking the house, Clara felt as if she'd aged years. Silas was waiting on the porch, Sheriff Holcomb beside him. Both men stood as Jesse and Clara approached. "Clara!" Silas rushed forward. "Thank God! When I saw the bodies, the blood, I thought—" "I'm fine," Clara said, dismounting without assistance. "Mister, Red Hawk saved my life." Holcomb spat tobacco juice. "Mighty convenient, him being nearby." Jesse's expression went cold. "Are you suggesting something, Sheriff?" "Just saying, Comancheros attack, and you happen to be watching the house? Man might wonder if you were working with them, setting it up so you could play hero." "That's ridiculous," Clara began. But Jesse held up a hand. "I don't explain myself to men like you," he told Holcomb. "The lady's safe. That's all that matters." He touched his hat to Clara, and she saw in his eyes all the words they couldn't say. Then he mounted and rode away without looking back. "Good riddance," Silas muttered. "Clara, come inside. You must be exhausted." She followed him, but her eyes tracked Jesse until he disappeared over the horizon. In her chest, her heart beat a rhythm that felt like breaking. The news spread through Mercy's Bend like wildfire in dry grass. By noon, everyone knew that Clara Whitmore had spent the night unchaperoned with Jesse Red Hawk, the half-breed bounty hunter. The fact that she'd nearly been killed by Comancheros seemed secondary to the scandal of where she'd sheltered afterward. Silas stood rigid in the parlor, his face the color of old ash. "They're saying you lay with him. They're wrong." Clara kept her voice steady, though inside she felt like screaming. "He saved my life and took me somewhere safe. That's all." "That's all?" Silas's laugh was bitter. "Do you have any idea what you've done? My reputation, our future." "Your reputation?" Clara's temper finally snapped. "I was nearly violated and murdered while you played cards in town, and you're worried about your reputation. You're hysterical. Women always get hysterical after what, Silas? After fighting for their lives? After being abandoned by the men who should protect them?" His hand cracked across her face, the sound sharp in the small room. Clara touched her cheek, tasting blood where her teeth had cut her lip. "You forget yourself," Silas said coldly. "I took you in, offered you marriage when no decent man would have you. A widow with no money, no family, no prospects. And this is how you repay me? Running off with a savage?" "He's not a savage. He's Apache. Same thing." Silas straightened his vest. "The wedding is off. I'll not have damaged goods for a wife." Clara laughed, surprising them both. "Damaged goods? Like a broken chair or a cracked plate? Pack your things. I want you gone by sunset." "Where exactly would you have me go?" "That's not my concern. You should have thought of that before you spread your legs for—" Clara slapped him, putting all her fear and anger behind it. Silas staggered, his hand flying to his reddening cheek. "Get out," he snarled. "Get out before I throw you out." Clara packed with shaking hands. Her few dresses, her books, Edward's portrait. Everything she owned fit in 2 bags. As she loaded them onto the wagon Silas had grudgingly allowed her to take, she became aware of being watched. Jesse sat his horse at the edge of the property, still as a statue. He'd known. She realized. Known what would happen when word got out. Silas emerged, rifle in hand. "You've got some nerve showing your face here. Red Hawk." Jesse ignored him, his eyes on Clara. "Where will you go?" "I don't know." She hated how small her voice sounded. "The Carson place, out by Willow Creek. They took damage in the raids, lost their foreman. They might need help." "Respectable folk won't hire her now," Silas sneered. "Not after what she's done." Jesse finally looked at him, and something in his gaze made Silas step back. "What she's done, she survived. That used to mean something in this country." He reached into his saddlebag, pulled out a leather pouch that clinked with coin. "This is yours," he told Clara, tossing it to her. "I can't— Payment for damages. The Comancheros were carrying stolen goods. Sheriff verified it. That's your share of the recovery fee." Clara knew it was a lie, knew he was giving her his own money, but pride was a luxury she couldn't afford. She tucked the pouch into her carpet bag. Thank you. Jesse touched his hat and rode away. This time, Clara didn't watch him go. She couldn't bear it. The Carson place turned her away, as did the Millers and the Jeffersons. Word had already spread. No decent family would hire a woman who'd been compromised, even if she could cook and clean and work harder than any two men. By the third day, Clara was down to her last few coins, sleeping in the wagon outside town. She'd applied at the saloon, desperate enough to consider work that would have horrified her Boston friends. But even they wouldn't have her. Bad for business, the owner explained, not unkindly. The wives would raise holy hell if I hired Red Hawk's woman. I'm not his woman. Honey, in this town, what you are and what people think you are amounts to the same thing. It was Mrs. Eliza Holloway who finally took pity on her. The minister's widow ran a small boarding house on the poor side of town, catering to drifters and those down on their luck. I can't pay much, she warned, studying Clara with shrewd gray eyes. Room, board, and $2 a week for helping with cooking and cleaning. You'll share a room with my daughter Ruth. I accept. Clara would have accepted half that. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. The work's hard and the lodgers are rough. But I run a Christian establishment. No liquor, no gambling. No entertaining men in your room. I understand. The boarding house was a revelation in endurance. Clara rose before dawn to start the cooking, worked until past dark cleaning, mending, washing. Her soft hands grew calloused. Her back ached constantly, but she was grateful for the exhaustion that let her fall into dreamless sleep. Ruth Holloway, 16 and full of romantic notions, pestered her constantly about Jesse. Is it true he fought off 20 Comancheros single-handed? That he carried you through the desert like a princess? That his eyes burned with savage passion? You read too many novels, Clara told her, scrubbing viciously at a pot. But you love him, don't you? I can see it when anyone mentions his name. Clara said nothing. What was there to say? That she dreamed of him nightly? That she woke reaching for someone who wasn't there? That she'd traded her reputation for one night of feeling truly alive? Jesse had vanished like smoke. Some said he'd gone south to Mexico. Others claimed he was tracking outlaws in the Northern Territories. Clara tried not to listen to the rumors, tried not to hope each time she heard hoofbeats that it might be him. 6 weeks after the night that changed everything, Clara was hanging laundry when she saw a familiar figure at the gate. Her heart leaped, then sank. It wasn't Jesse. Silas Manning stood with his hat in his hands, looking older and more tired than she remembered. Clara, may I speak with you? I'm working, Mr. Manning. Please, just a moment. She set down the wash basket, wiping her hands on her apron. What do you want? To apologize, and to ask— He swallowed hard. To ask you to reconsider. Reconsider? Marriage. I was hasty before, angry, said things I shouldn't have. Clara stared at him. You threw me out, called me damaged goods. I know, I was wrong. He twisted his hat. The truth is, I need a wife. The ranch is falling apart without a woman's touch. And you, despite everything, you're a good woman, a decent woman. Despite everything? Clara repeated. How generous. I'm willing to overlook your indiscretion. We could start fresh. I'd treat you well, provide for you. You'd have respectability again. Respectability. The word sat like lead in her stomach. 6 weeks ago, it might have tempted her. Now, I appreciate the offer, she said carefully. But I must decline. You're refusing me, you? His face reddened. You're living in a boarding house, working like a scullery maid, ruined in the eyes of decent society. And you're refusing my offer? Yes. Because of him? Because of that half-breed bastard who ruined you and left? Clara's chin lifted. No, because I'd rather scrub floors until my hands bleed than share a bed with a man who sees me as property, who left me alone to face killers, who values his reputation more than my life. You'll regret this, Silas snarled. When you're old and alone, worn out from drudgery, you'll wish you'd taken my offer. Perhaps, but that's my choice to make." He stormed off, and Clara returned to the laundry with shaking hands. "Mrs." Holloway appeared at her elbow. "Heard all that," the older woman said. "You did right, girl. Man like that would have made your life a misery. My life is already a misery." "Is it? You're free. You work hard but honest. You sleep sound at night. That's more than many can say." She paused. "Including that Red Hawk fellow. I'd wager." Clara's hands stilled. "Have you heard something?" "Ruth's beau works at the telegraph office. Says Red Hawk sent money to be delivered here, to you. I won't take his charity. Didn't say you should. Just saying. Man doesn't send money to a woman he's forgotten." That night, Clara found an envelope under her door. Inside was $50 and a note in careful script. "For damages sustained. J.R." She wanted to tear it up, to send it back with a scathing message about charity and pity. Instead, she tucked it under her mattress. Pride was still a luxury she couldn't afford. The days blurred together. Summer gave way to autumn, the desert heat finally breaking. Clara learned to find satisfaction in small things: a perfectly made bed, Ruth's laughter, Mrs. Holloway's approving nod at a well-cooked meal. She was bringing in firewood one evening when she saw him. Jesse stood across the street, watching the boarding house. He looked thinner, travel-worn, a new scar across his left hand. Clara's heart stopped, then raced. She forced herself to continue to the woodpile, to load her arms with kindling. When she looked again, he was gone, but she knew he'd be back, knew it with a certainty that should have frightened her but instead filled her with a fierce, terrible hope. That night, she left her window open despite the cold, and when a pebble struck the glass near midnight, she was already awake, already moving to look out. Jesse stood in the moonlight, real and solid in there. Clara didn't think. She grabbed her shawl and slipped out, her bare feet silent on the stairs. Mrs. Holloway had strict rules about men, about propriety, about Christian behavior. Clara broke them all as she stepped into the night. They stood facing each other in the shadows behind the boarding house, close enough to touch but not touching. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. "I know." "Then why?" "You know why." The same words he'd used in the canyon. The same truth neither of them could speak. "You left," she accused, without a word. "What words were there? Stay and watch you marry Manning? Watch them destroy you for being with me? They destroyed me anyway." "No." He stepped closer, and she could see the pain in his eyes. "You're still standing, still fighting. That's not destroyed." "I'm tired. Jesse, tired of fighting, tired of being alone. You think I'm not?" His control cracked. "You think I don't lie awake remembering? Think I don't curse myself daily for touching you, for ruining your chances? My chances at what? A loveless marriage? A life of pretense? A life of safety, respectability? I had respectability in Boston. It was killing me slowly." She touched his face, felt him shudder. "That night in the canyon, I was alive. For the first time since Edward died, maybe for the first time ever, I was alive. Clara." She kissed him, pouring all her loneliness and longing into it. He resisted for a heartbeat, then pulled her against him, his hands tangling in her hair. When they broke apart, both were shaking. "Come with me," he said roughly. "I've got money saved. We could go north, maybe California, start fresh where nobody knows us. And live as what? Your mistress?" "My wife, if you'll have me." The words hung between them. Impossible and necessary. "You know what that means," Clara said. "What our children would be. The looks, the whispers, the closed doors. I know. Is love enough? To overcome all that?" Jesse cupped her face in his hands. "I don't know, but I know living without you is no living at all." Clara returned to her room that night with Jesse's proposal echoing in her mind. She lay awake until dawn, staring at the cracked ceiling, weighing impossible choices. By morning, she'd made her decision. "I need time," she'd told him. "This isn't just about us." Jesse had nodded, understanding in his dark eyes. "I'll wait. But not forever." Clara, a man like me doesn't get many chances at happiness. Now, 2 days later, Clara moved through her chores like a ghost. Mrs. Holloway noticed. Of course. You're somewhere else, child. The older woman observed over breakfast preparations. That wouldn't have anything to do with a certain rider seen near my establishment. Clara's hands stilled on the bread dough. You knew? Not much escapes me. Question is, what are you going to do about it? I don't know. Yes, you do. You're just afraid to admit it. That afternoon, Clara took her meager savings and walked to the general store. If she was going to make a choice, she needed to understand what she was choosing. She purchased paper and ink, then found a quiet corner in the boarding house to write. The first letter was to a cousin in San Francisco, inquiring about opportunities there. The second was to the territorial marshal, asking about Jessie's standing with the law. The third, hardest to write, was to her late husband's sister in Boston. Dearest Margaret, she began, you will perhaps be shocked to learn where life has taken me. While waiting for replies, Clara observed the life around her with new eyes. She watched the Mexican families who lived on the wrong side of town, saw how they were treated. She noticed the few mixed couples, an Irish miner and his Indian wife, a Chinese merchant with a Mexican bride. They existed on the margins, tolerated but never accepted. Ruth found her one evening, sitting in the kitchen garden. You're thinking of going with him? It wasn't a question. Clara nodded. Good, Ruth said fiercely. Love like that doesn't come twice. How would you know? You're 16, and you're 26, not dead. Ruth sat beside her. My mother loved my father desperately. When he died, part of her died too, but she says the years they had were worth all the pain that came after. Clara thought of Edward, kind, safe Edward, who'd never made her pulse race or her breath catch. Their marriage had been comfortable, proper. She'd grieved when he died, but it was the grief of losing a friend, not the soul-deep agony she felt being separated from Jessie. The replies came within a week. Her cousin wrote warmly, saying San Francisco was booming and opportunities abounded for a woman willing to work. The marshal's response was terse but clear. Jessie Redhawk had no outstanding warrants and had, in fact, assisted law enforcement on numerous occasions. Margaret's letter was the hardest to read. My dear Clara, I confess myself astonished by your circumstances. To think of you, who graced our best parlors, now working as a common domestic, and this entanglement with a man of mixed blood. I hardly know what to say. Yet I remember how pale you were in those months after Edward's passing, how you seemed to fade before our eyes. If this hard life has brought color back to your cheeks, if this inappropriate man has reminded you how to live, then perhaps conventional wisdom is not always wise. I pray you find happiness, wherever that may lead. Clara read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. That night, Jessie appeared again. This time, Clara was ready. I have questions, she said, pulling her shawl tight against the cold. Ask, where would we live? I've got my eye on a piece of land up north. Good water, sheltered valley. We could build something. And live on what? I've saved most of what I've earned. Enough to start. I can hunt, trap, maybe raise horses. You could keep chickens, a garden. What about children? His jaw tightened. They'd face what I faced, maybe worse. Could you watch that? Your own blood going through what you did? Could you watch them never being born because we were too afraid to try? Clara had no answer for that. What about your people? She asked. The Apache who raised you. Most are gone, scattered to the winds or penned up on reservations. The few left want nothing to do with me. His voice was bitter. I chose the white world when I started working for their law. No going back from that. So we'd both be outcasts. Yes. They stood in silence, the weight of truth between them. I need one more day, Clara said finally. Jessie caught her hand as she turned to go. Whatever you decide, know this, you gave me something I never had before. Hope, even if you say no. I'm grateful for that. Clara squeezed his fingers, then fled before she could do something foolish like drag him to her room and damn the consequences. The next morning brought chaos. A rider came tearing into town, shouting about Apache raids to the south. Within hours, panic gripped Mercy's Bend. Old stories were dragged out, embellished. Anyone with Indian blood became suspect. Clara was serving breakfast when they came for Jesse. He'd been staying at the livery, keeping to himself. But fear made men stupid and cruel. A mob gathered, led by Silas Manning and Sheriff Holcomb. "Red Hawk's been scouting for them savages," Silas shouted. "Why else would he be lurking around town?" Clara dropped her tray and ran. Ruth at her heels. They found the mob outside the livery. Jesse backed against the wall, guns drawn but not aimed. He could have shot his way out. Clara could see it in his stance, but he was trying to avoid bloodshed. "This is about Clara," he said, voice carrying over the crowd. "Not about any raids." "Convenient excuse," someone yelled. "I've got a woman I was with 2 nights ago in Tucson. Wire her if you want, unless Apache can be in 2 places at once." But the mob wasn't interested in logic. Clara saw the rope someone was fashioning into a noose and felt her decision crystallize into certainty. She pushed through the crowd, placing herself between Jesse and the mob. "Stop this! Get out of the way, woman!" Holcomb ordered. "No?" Clara's voice rang clear. "You want to hang someone for having Indian blood? Then hang me too, because I love him, I've lain with him. If that makes him guilty, it makes me guilty too." Shocked silence. Ruth stepped up beside her. "And me? I'm guilty of believing love matters more than blood." Mrs. Holloway appeared, sturdy and implacable. "And me, guilty of giving shelter to anyone who needs it, regardless of their heritage." One by one, others stepped forward. Not many, but enough. The Mexican seamstress, the Chinese merchant, the Irish miner and his Indian wife, even Doc Morrison, who'd seen too much death to countenance more. The mob wavered, confused by this unexpected resistance. Then gunfire echoed from the south. Real raiders, it turned out, hitting the stage road. The mob dissolved as men ran for their horses, the immediate threat overriding their manufactured one. Jesse holstered his guns, his eyes never leaving Clara's face. "You sure about this?" "I've never been more sure of anything." He vaulted the fence and kissed her there in the street, in front of God and everyone. When they broke apart, Clara was laughing through her tears. "We leave tonight," Jesse said. "Pack light." But Silas wasn't finished. Humiliated by Clara's public declaration, he confronted her that evening as she collected her few belongings. "You're making a mistake," he said, blocking her path. "I'm offering you one last chance. Marry me, and all this goes away." "No." "You'd choose that savage over me?" "Every time." His face contorted. "Then you're no better than his whore mother." The words hit like physical blows. Clara saw Jesse appear behind Silas, saw murder in his eyes. "Don't," she said quietly. "He's not worth it." But Silas, drunk on his own rage, made the mistake of grabbing Clara's arm. Jesse moved faster than thought, his fist connecting with Silas's jaw. The rancher dropped like a stone. "Touch her again," Jesse said softly, "and I'll forget my promise about not killing you." They left within the hour, Clara on the horse Jesse had bought for her. Their few possessions in saddlebags, Mrs. Holloway pressed a package into Clara's hands, food for the journey and a small Bible. "For the wedding," she said, "when you find someone to perform it." Ruth hugged her fiercely. "Write to me. Tell me everything." As they rode out of Mercy's Bend, Clara didn't look back. Behind them lay safety, respectability, the known world. Ahead stretched uncertainty, hardship, and quite possibly heartbreak. But Jesse rode beside her, solid and real. And when he reached over to take her hand, Clara felt more at home than she'd ever felt within 4 walls. They made camp that first night by a spring Jesse knew, where cottonwoods provided shelter and the stars seemed close enough to touch. As Clara lay in his arms, listening to coyotes sing in the distance, she thought about the letter she'd write to Margaret. "Tell her I died," she murmured against Jesse's chest. "What?" "The woman who came west seeking a gentle rancher. She's dead. The woman I am now. She was born in a canyon with ancient writing on the walls, baptized in blood and fire, and married under stars to a man the world says she shouldn't love. Jesse's arms tightened around her. No regrets? Ask me in 50 years. He laughed, the sound rumbling through his chest. Deal. They traveled north through lands that grew greener as they went, stopping at small towns where no one knew their names. In Prescott, they found a justice of the peace who married them for $5, with a miner and a saloon girl as witnesses. Not exactly a Boston society wedding, Clara said as they left the courthouse. Disappointed? She pulled him down for a kiss that scandalized passing matrons. Never. Their wedding night was spent under the stars, making love with a freedom born of legitimacy and isolation. Clara traced the scars on Jesse's body, each one a story of survival. He worshipped her pale skin, marveling at the strength beneath the softness. My wife, he said, wonder in his voice. My husband, she replied, and felt the last chains of her old life fall away. They reached the valley Jesse had spoken of as autumn touched the aspen's gold. It was everything he'd promised: water, grass, shelter from winter storms. Together they built a simple cabin, Clara learning to notch logs and chink walls. Her hands, once soft enough for Boston parlors, grew calloused and strong. Her skin, once carefully protected, tanned from working under the sun. When morning sickness took her that first winter, she faced it with the same determination that had carried her across the desert. You're sure? Jesse asked when she told him, joy and fear warring in his eyes. I'm sure. He built a cradle that winter, carving it with symbols from both their heritages, Apache patterns mixed with New England roses. Clara sewed tiny clothes and sang lullabies in the gathering darkness. When spring came, bringing their son with it, Clara looked into eyes that held both Jesse's darkness and her own light. The baby's cry echoed across their valley, announcement of a new life that belonged fully to neither world but wholly to love. No regrets? Jesse asked again, watching her nurse their son. Clara smiled, thinking of all the closed doors behind them and all the open sky ahead. Never. The autumn of 1885 brought unexpected visitors to their valley. Clara was harvesting the last of the squash when she heard the horses, too many for honest travelers. Her hand went automatically to the rifle propped against the garden fence. Jesse, she called, but he was already emerging from the barn, his own weapon ready. 3 riders approached slowly, hands visible. Clara recognized the lead man, Tom Brennan, a rancher from the neighboring valley. The other 2 were his sons, barely out of their teens. Red Hawk, Brennan called. We come in peace. Need to talk. Jesse lowered his rifle but kept it ready. Talk. Rustlers hit us last week. Took 30 head. My neighbor lost 20. Trail leads toward the mountains. Apache country. Not my concern, Jesse said flatly. Could be. Folks are getting stirred up. Talk of riding against any Apache they can find. Your wife, your boy. Brennan's meaning was clear. Clara stepped forward. You're warning us? Your man helped my daughter once. Found her when she got lost in a snowstorm. I pay my debts. Brennan shifted in his saddle. But there's more. We need a tracker. Someone who knows those mountains? Hire someone else, Jesse said. There is no one else. Not who could find them and maybe talk instead of shoot. Clara saw Jesse's jaw tighten. She knew what he was thinking, that getting involved would draw attention to their small family, shatter the peaceful life they'd built. But she also knew the alternative. If vigilantes rode against peaceful Apache, the retaliation would be swift and brutal. Their valley wouldn't stay hidden forever. I'll think on it, Jesse finally said. After the men left, Clara found Jesse in the barn, repairing harness with violent efficiency. You have to go, she said quietly. No. Jesse, I left that life behind. Tracking. Hunting men, that's not who I am anymore. It's exactly who you are. Just because you choose not to use those skills doesn't mean they're gone. She touched his arm. If you don't go, innocent people will die, Apache and white both. And if I do go, what's to stop them from following me back here, from discovering you and James? Their son's name hung between them. James Edward Red Hawk, now 2 years old. with his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes. A beautiful child who would never fully belong in either world. "We can't hide forever," Clara said. "Maybe it's time to stop trying." Jesse pulled her against him. "I can't lose you, either of you. You won't, but we can't live in fear either. That's not the life I want for James." That night, they made love with desperate intensity, as if storing up touches against the separation to come. When Jesse rode out at dawn, Clara stood in the doorway with James in her arms, watching until horse and rider vanished into the mountains. The days that followed were the longest of Clara's life. She went through the motions, feeding chickens, milking their cow, playing with James, but her ears strained constantly for hoofbeats. At night, she barricaded the door and slept with the rifle beside her. On the fourth day, smoke appeared on the horizon, not the lazy smoke of campfires, but black pillars that spoke of destruction. Clara packed essentials, ready to flee if needed, but the smoke remained distant. Jesse returned on the seventh day, exhausted and grim. There was blood on his shirt, not his own. "It's done," he said, sliding from his horse. Clara didn't ask for details. The haunted look in his eyes said enough. She drew him a bath, fed him, put him to bed. Only later, when James was asleep and they sat by the fire, did he speak. Wasn't Apache, white men dressed as Apache, trying to start a war. They'd been hitting both sides, stealing cattle, leaving evidence to point fingers. "Did you stop them?" "Yes." His voice was flat. "Brennan's boys wanted to hang them on the spot. I convinced them to take them to the marshal instead. Don't know if that was mercy or cruelty. It was justice." "Was it?" Jesse stared into the fire. "One of them was just a kid, maybe 16, crying for his mother when they tied him up." Clara took his hand. "You did what needed doing, saved lives on both sides, and made us visible again. Brennan's spreading word about the breed who saved the valley. Some see me as a hero, others as proof that mixed blood means mixed loyalties. Let them talk. We know who you are." But the damage was done. Within a month, their valley saw more visitors than it had in 2 years. Some came to trade, treating Jesse with newfound respect. Others came to gawk at the white woman who'd married a half Apache and the child they'd created. One visitor stood out. A woman named Sarah Wessex, traveling with her husband, a doctor heading to California. She was Clara's age, educated, clearly from money. When she saw Clara chopping wood while James played in the dirt, her expression was unreadable. "Might I have some water?" Sarah asked. "The road is dusty." Clara obliged, watching the woman drink delicately from the tin cup. "You're from back east," Sarah observed. "Boston, I'd guess from your accent." "Once. I'm from Philadelphia myself. My family was unsupportive of my marriage. Charles is brilliant but poor. They wanted better for me." Sarah smiled wryly. "I suppose we're both exiles of a sort." They talked for an hour while the men discussed routes and weather. Sarah was witty, intelligent, and desperately lonely. When she left, she pressed a package into Clara's hands. "Books," she explained. "I noticed you had Shakespeare on your shelf. These are newer. Dickens, Austen, a reminder that there's still beauty in the world." After they'd gone, Clara found herself crying over the gifts, not from sadness, but from the unexpected kindness of a stranger who saw her as a person, not a curiosity or cautionary tale. Winter came early that year, fierce and unforgiving. They were snowed in by November. The pass to town blocked by drifts. Clara didn't mind. These were her favorite times, when the world shrank to just their cabin, their family. She taught James his letters by the fire while Jesse carved toys from pine. They told stories, Apache tales from Jesse's childhood mixed with fairy tales from Clara's. James absorbed it all, his quick mind making connections between worlds. "Why does grandmother in your story live in the forest, Mama, but father's grandmother lived in the desert?" "Because there are many ways to live," Clara explained. "Many places to call home. Is this our home?" "Yes, little one, this is our home." But even in their snowbound sanctuary, The outside world intruded. Jesse grew restless as winter deepened, pacing like a caged wolf. The incident with the rustlers had awakened something in him, not bloodlust, but purpose. He'd spent so long running from what he was, he'd forgotten he could use those skills for good. "There's talk of needing a sheriff in Whitewater," he said one night. "The mining booms brought trouble. You're considering it? Town's more mixed than most. Chinese, Mexican, Irish, even some Apache married to miners. Might be they'd accept someone like me. And if they don't, then we're no worse off than now." Clara considered. Whitewater was 3 days' ride. Far enough from their past, but close enough to keep the land. James would have other children to play with. Maybe even a school. "I won't be a sheriff's wife who stays home wringing her hands," she warned. Jesse grinned, the expression taking years off his face. Wouldn't expect anything else. Spring brought decision. They kept the cabin as a retreat, but rented a house in Whitewater. The town was everything Jesse had said, rough but oddly egalitarian, where survival mattered more than skin color. Not everyone was welcoming. The first day, someone painted "Breed Lover" on their door. Jesse washed it off without comment. The second day, Clara answered the door with her rifle prominent, smiling sweetly at the woman who'd come to warn her about the neighborhood's unsavory elements. "Thank you so much for your concern," Clara said. "I'm sure my husband, the sheriff, will address any problems." Word spread quickly. Some businesses refused their custom. Others welcomed them warmly. Clara enrolled James in the small school, standing firm when parents protested. "My son has as much right to education as yours," she told the school board. "Unless you plan to turn away the Chinese children, the Mexican children, the Irish children, where exactly do you draw your lines?" One board member, red-faced with anger, started to speak. Clara cut him off. "I've killed men who threatened my family," she said quietly. "I've survived things that would break you. Do not mistake my manners for weakness." James was admitted to the school. The real test came when Jesse arrested the mayor's son for assault. The boy had beaten a Chinese miner nearly to death, confident his father's position would protect him. That night, men gathered outside their house, not quite a mob, but close. Clara sent James to hide in the root cellar, then joined Jesse at the window, rifle ready. "This could go bad," he said. "Then we face it together." But they weren't alone. One by one, others emerged from their houses. The Chinese merchant Jesse had treated fairly, the Mexican family whose daughter Clara had nursed through fever, the Irish widow whose son Jesse had kept from the bottle. Not many, but enough to balance the scales. The crowd dispersed. The mayor's son stood trial and went to prison. Jesse kept his job. "You did that," he told Clara that night. "Built those friendships, those alliances." "We did that," she corrected. "By living honestly, working hard, treating people as people." But the victory came with a price. A letter arrived from Boston. Margaret had died, leaving Clara a small inheritance and a note. "Use this to build the life Edward would have wanted for you, one of courage and joy." Clara wept for the woman who'd understood her better than she'd realized. With the money, they bought the land outright, built a better house, started a small ranch. Jesse kept his sheriff's position, but now they had security beyond his salary. James grew strong and clever, navigating between worlds with an ease his parents never mastered. He learned to fight from his father, to think from his mother. When other children taunted him about his mixed blood, he stood tall. "I'm Apache and Irish and English and American," he announced to his tormentors. "I'm everything you fear because I'm everything you could be if you were brave enough." Clara, watching from the schoolhouse window, felt her heart swell with pride and break with sorrow. Her son would always fight battles she'd created by loving his father, but he was fighting them with strength she'd helped forge. That night, as Jesse played with James in the yard, teaching him to track rabbits in the dust, Clara started a letter to Ruth back in Mercy's Bend. "You asked me to write of everything," she began. "Here is my everything. A husband who walks between worlds and makes them both stronger. A son who carries the hope of what America could become. A life built on love that society calls impossible. And through it all, the absolute certainty that I chose correctly when I chose love over safety, truth over respectability, a man over a life. Some days are hard, some people are cruel, but when I wake to Jesse's face, when I hear James's laughter, when I see the home we've built against all odds, I know this is where I belong. Not in spite of the challenges, but because of how we face them. Tell those who remember me that Clara Whitmore did die in the desert. She was reborn as Clara Redhawk, and she has never been more alive. The spring of 1887 brought change to Whitewater. The silver mines were producing well, drawing newcomers who shifted the town's delicate balance. Among them came Harrison Blackwood, a mine owner from Denver with political ambitions and a particular hatred for race mixing. Jesse felt the shift immediately. Suddenly, his arrests were questioned, his authority challenged. Men who'd nodded respectfully now looked through him. Clara noticed the change in how she was treated at the mercantile. Conversations stopping when she entered. Purchases taking longer as clerks searched for items in plain sight. "He's poisoning the well," Jesse said one evening, watching Blackwood glad-hand voters outside the saloon, promising to clean up the town if elected mayor. "Then we fight back," Clara said, "with truth." But truth was a weak weapon against fear and prejudice. When Jesse arrested one of Blackwood's foremen for claim jumping, Blackwood himself appeared at the jail. "You're overstepping, Redhawk. My men deserve better than harassment from a half-breed playing lawman." Jesse's voice remained level. "Your man stole from the Chin family. Law's the law." "Not for long." Blackwood smiled coldly. "Come election time, this town will have a proper sheriff. A white sheriff." That night, Clara found Jesse sitting on their porch, stargazing in silence. She settled beside him, taking his hand. "We could leave," she offered. "Go back to the valley. And let him win. It wouldn't be losing. It would be choosing peace." Jesse turned to her, and she saw the warrior in his eyes, the part of him that had survived massacre and prejudice and attempts to break his spirit. "Running teaches James that we're less than them, that we don't deserve to stand our ground." He squeezed her hand. "I won't do that to our son." The campaign against them intensified. Editorials appeared in the newspaper questioning whether a man of divided loyalties could serve justice. Flyers warned of the mongrelization of Whitewater's children. One morning, Clara found their chickens slaughtered, their blood painting Apache symbols on the coop, a crude attempt to stir racial hatred. James, now 4 and too perceptive for his own good, asked why people were being mean. "Because they're afraid," Clara told him, cleaning blood from the wood. Of Papa? Of themselves. Of what they might discover if they looked past skin to soul. Jesse threw himself into his work, determined to prove his worth through action. When flash floods threatened the Mexican quarter, he organized rescue efforts. When fever struck the Chinese camp, he enforced quarantine fairly, preventing spread while ensuring the sick received care. Slowly, those he'd helped began to speak up. Not loudly. Blackwood's money bought many voices, but consistently. The Irish remembered how he'd stopped their evictions. The Chinese recalled his fairness in dispute settlements. The Mexicans spoke of rescue and respect. Clara did her part, organizing the women others ignored. She started a school fund that welcomed all children, held quilting circles that mixed colors and languages, created a lending library in their home where anyone could borrow books. "You're making things worse for yourself," Mrs. Hamilton, the banker's wife, warned during a chance encounter. "If you just keep to your own kind." "My kind?" Clara's voice could have frozen July. "You mean humans? I do keep to my own kind." 3 weeks before the election, violence erupted. A group of miners, drunk on whiskey and Blackwood's rhetoric, attacked the Chinese camp. Jesse and his deputies responded, but they were outnumbered. Clara heard the gunfire from their house. Leaving James with their neighbor, she grabbed her rifle and rode hard toward the sound. She found Jesse pinned behind an overturned wagon. 3 deputies down, the mob closing in. She didn't hesitate. Her first shot took the hat off the mob's leader. Her second shattered a whiskey bottle in someone's hand. "The next one won't miss," she shouted. "Get back to your homes before I make widows of your wives." The mob wavered. A woman with a gun was outside their experience, especially one who clearly knew how to use it. Jesse used their confusion to rally, and within minutes, the attackers scattered, but the damage was done. 2 Chinese miners were dead, several more injured. The deputies would survive, but barely. And Blackwood had his ammunition. "Sheriff allows his woman to fight his battles," the headline screamed. "Chaos in Whitewater as Red Hawk fails to maintain order." That evening, unexpected visitors arrived. Tom Brennan and his sons, the ranchers Jesse had helped 2 years before, rode in with a dozen men. "Heard you might need some deputies." Brennan said, "Temporary-like, until this foolishness passes." Behind them came others, cowboys Jesse had treated fairly, ranchers he'd helped recover stock, even a few townsmen who'd stayed silent but couldn't anymore. "Why?" Jesse asked. "Because," Brennan said simply. "A man should be judged by his actions, not his blood. You've acted with honor. That's what matters." The reinforcements shifted the balance, but Blackwood wasn't finished. He brought in speakers who railed against miscegenation, papers that printed stories of savage attacks in other territories, fearmongers who painted pictures of white women stolen and children corrupted. Clara bore the brunt of personal attacks. Whispers followed her everywhere. Fallen woman, race traitor, Apache's whore. She held her head high, but Jesse saw the toll in private moments, the tears she thought he didn't notice. One evening, she found him cleaning his guns with methodical precision. "What are you planning?" "Nothing. Jesse Red Hawk, I know you better than that." He set down the rifle. "I could end this, one shot, in the dark. Make it look like claim jumpers or—" "No." Clara knelt before him, taking his face in her hands. "That's not who you are. Not anymore. Not the man James looks up to. Not the sheriff this town needs. Not the husband I love. They're hurting you. They're trying to. There's a difference." She kissed him softly. "We win by being better than them, not by becoming them." The election came down to a debate. Blackwood's idea. Certain his polished Eastern education would show the savage sheriff as ignorant. The whole town packed into the meeting hall, tensions thick enough to cut. Blackwood spoke first, smooth and eloquent about progress and propriety, standards and civilization. He never said white, but the implication hung heavy. When Jesse's turn came, he stood silent for a long moment. Then, "I'm not educated like Mr. Blackwood. Don't have his fancy words. But I know this town, know every family, every struggle, every strength. I've bled for this town, same as many of you. Mr. Blackwood talks about civilization. Where I come from, civilization means helping neighbors regardless of color, means judging by deed, not blood, means building up, not tearing down. He says I'm divided, can't serve justice with mixed blood, but I say that blood makes me understand both sides of every divide. When Chinese and Irish clash over water rights, I understand both thirsts. When Mexican and American argue over land, I know both claims. You want a sheriff who sees only one color? Vote Blackwood. You want a sheriff who sees people? Well, you know where I stand." He sat down to mixed applause and boos, but Clara saw something Blackwood missed. The thoughtful faces, the reconsidering eyes, the small nods from those who'd stayed silent too long. When Clara stood to speak from the floor, unplanned, improper, but necessary, the hall erupted. Women didn't speak at political meetings. Mixed-blood wives certainly didn't. She waited for quiet, then spoke with the clarity that education and conviction bring. "I came here from Boston, where bloodlines mattered more than character, where your grandfather's name determined your worth. I left that world because it was killing my soul. Here, I found a man who saved my life asking nothing in return, who stands between this town and chaos every day, who teaches our son that strength comes from understanding, not hatred. Yes, I chose to love a man with Apache blood. Yes, I bore his child. Yes, I'll stand beside him until my last breath. If that makes me fallen in your eyes, so be it. I'd rather fall with honor than rise with prejudice." She sat down to stunned silence, then scattered applause that grew until half the hall was clapping. Women mostly. But men too, those who'd seen Jesse's fairness firsthand. The vote was close, closer than it should have been. But when the count finished, Jesse remained sheriff by 17 votes. Blackwood left town within a week, but not before warning that this isn't over. That night, as they lay entwined in their bed, Clara traced the new lines on Jesse's face, the gray threading his temples. "We won," she said. "This battle, not the war. Then we keep fighting. Until when? Until James lives in a world where he's seen as twice blessed, not half cursed. Until love matters more than blood. Until we win or die trying." Jesse pulled her close. "Could be a long fight. Good thing I married a warrior. Good thing I married a woman who fights with words sharper than any blade." Outside, Whitewater slept. Chinese and Irish and Mexican and Apache and a dozen other bloods mixing in the desert dust. Not perfect, not peaceful, but possible. In his small bed, James dreamed untouched by the day's battles. But come morning, his parents would teach him again. Through example, through love, through sheer stubborn refusal to accept less. That he was whole, not half. That he was bridge, not barrier. That he was exactly what America needed, whether America knew it or not. The war Blackwood promised would come. Others would challenge their right to exist, to love, to stand as equals. But tonight, they'd won. Tonight, Clara Redhawk fell asleep in her husband's arms in their hard-won home. Sheriff Starr on the bedpost. Future uncertain but spirit unbroken. She'd traded safety for love, propriety for truth, easiness for meaning. And as sleep took her, listening to Jesse's heartbeat and the distant coyote songs, she knew with bone-deep certainty she'd make the same choice again, every time, forever. The summer of 1888 brought a traveling photographer to Whitewater, and with him, an unexpected gift. Samuel Morrison, no relation to the Reverend, set up his studio near the hotel and advertised portraits at reasonable rates. "We should have one made," Clara suggested, watching James play with his wooden horse in the yard. "A family portrait." Jesse hesitated. Photographs had a way of traveling, of being seen by people who might recognize them, might remember old grievances. But the hope in Clara's eyes decided him. They dressed in their finest. Clara in the green dress she'd worn to face down the election mob. Jesse in his sheriff's attire. James in the suit they'd bought for his first day of school. The photographer, used to stiff formal poses, was delighted when James laughed at his father's funny face, when Clara leaned naturally into Jesse's shoulder, when the love between them shone through despite the long exposure time. "Beautiful family," Morrison said, "the kind of photo that tells a story." He couldn't know how much of a story, or that copies of that portrait would soon carry their tale far beyond Whitewater's dusty streets. The first sign of trouble came through the mail, a letter from a newspaper in Denver, requesting an interview with the controversial mixed-blood sheriff and his Boston bride. Jesse burned it, but others followed. Someone, likely Blackwood, had been spreading their story to sympathetic ears. Then came the visitors, a writer from Harper's Magazine, eager to pen a sensational tale of love across the racial divide, a minister from Kansas, thundering about the sanctity of racial purity, curiosity seekers who treated their family like a circus exhibit. Jesse handled them with cold civility, but Clara saw the strain. He'd started riding out alone again, seeking solitude in the desert, returning with that haunted look she recognized from their early days. "Maybe we should have stayed hidden," he said one night, after turning away yet another gawker. "No." Clara was fierce in her certainty. "Hiding says we're ashamed. We're not ashamed." But the attention brought more than annoyance. It brought danger. Letters arrived. Anonymous, ugly, threatening. Someone poisoned their dog. A rock through their window nearly hit James. The breaking point came when James returned from school with a black eye and torn shirt. "They said I don't belong here," he told his parents, trying not to cry. "Said we should go back where we came from. But where's that? Papa, where do we come from? Jesse knelt before his son. We come from love, boy, from courage. From two people who saw past what the world said to what their hearts knew. Is that enough? It has to be. That night, Clara found Jesse on the roof, watching the stars, an old Apache habit. He'd told her, seeking answers in the eternal. I failed them, he said when she joined him. Who? My mother, James, you. His voice was raw. I thought I could protect you by being good enough, strong enough, white enough, but they'll never see past the blood. Then we make them see past it. How? Clara was quiet for a moment. Then, by living so well, so truly, that our lives become the argument, by raising James to be proud of all his heritage, by refusing to let hate define us. That's not enough for today. Today, our son is hurt. Then today, we hold him. Tomorrow, we teach him to stand taller. The next morning brought unexpected allies. Mrs. Chen, the laundry owner, arrived with a basket of food and her son Lee, James's classmate. Lee told me what happened, she said in careful English. Those boys bother him too. Maybe they play together, protect each other. Throughout the day, others came. The Gonzalez twins, the O'Brien boy, the daughter of the Jewish merchant. Parents who understood exclusion, offering their children as shields and friends. You did this, Jesse told Clara, watching James play with his new protectors. Your library, your circles, your kindness. You built this. But the greatest surprise came from Mercy's Bend. Ruth Holloway, no longer a romantic girl but a determined young woman, arrived on the stage with a carpetbag and a mission. I'm starting a school, she announced. A real school, where children learn about all kinds of people and places, where different isn't dangerous but interesting. And I want James to be my first student. Behind her came others. Mrs. Holloway, older but still formidable. The doctor and his wife Sarah, who'd given Clara books. Even Tom Brennan with news that he was running for territorial legislature on a platform of equal justice. Change is coming, Ruth said. Slow. Maybe, but coming, and families like yours are lighting the way. They transformed the old mission building into Ruth's school. Clara taught literature. Jesse taught tracking and survival skills. Visiting parents shared their cultures and stories. Soon, children from 3 counties were attending, learning that difference was wealth, not weakness. The photographer Morrison returned, drawn by word of the unusual school. This time, he captured not just the Red Hawk family but the entire mixed group of students and teachers, a portrait of America's future that would later hang in museums as testament to possibility. Blackwood made one last attempt to destroy what they'd built. He arrived with federal marshals and old papers, claiming Jesse had committed crimes during his bounty hunter days, demanding his arrest. The whole town turned out for what followed. Jesse stood ready to surrender rather than bring violence. But Clara stepped forward with papers of her own, testimonies from those he'd saved, pardons from grateful officials, proof of his service to law and order. If you arrest him, she told the marshals, you'll have to arrest half this town. We've all broken your laws, laws against marrying across race lines, laws against teaching Chinese children alongside white, laws against treating humans as humans regardless of color, so take us all, or leave us be. The marshals looked at the crowd, Apache and Irish and Mexican and Chinese and more, all standing together, and decided discretion was the better part of valor. Blackwood left in disgrace, his last card played and lost. Years passed. The Red Hawk family prospered, their ranch growing, their influence spreading. James grew tall and strong, proud of both heritages, fluent in multiple languages and comfortable in multiple worlds. He went east for college, Harvard, like his mother's people, but returned to practice law in the territory, defending those the system overlooked. Jesse aged into an elder statesman. His badge passed to a deputy, but his wisdom sought by all. He and Tom Brennan worked to pass laws protecting mixed families, establishing rights for all citizens regardless of blood. Clara's hair silvered and her hands grew thin. but her spirit never dimmed. She wrote their story, published first in newspapers, then as a book that scandalized and inspired in equal measure. Love Across the Divide, a true account of Apache Anglo marriage in the American West, became required reading in Ruth's expanding schools. On their 25th anniversary, the town threw a celebration. The photographer Morrison, now famous, returned to capture the scene. Hundreds gathered to honor a couple who'd shown that love could conquer fear, that courage could overcome prejudice, that America's strength lay not in purity, but in mixing. Jesse and Clara danced as the sun set over Whitewater, the same sun that had witnessed their first meeting, their first kiss, their first child's cry. Around them swirled their legacy, mixed couples who'd found courage in their example, children who'd never learned to hate difference, a town transformed from suspicious to accepting. "Do you remember?" Clara asked, "when I came seeking a gentle rancher and found a wild Apache instead, the best trade I ever made, even with all the pain, all the fighting?" Clara pulled back to look at him, her husband, her warrior, her love. Especially with that, easy love might be comfortable, but hard-won love? That changes the world. As if summoned by their words, James appeared with his own bride, a woman as fierce and mixed as himself, carrying their grandchild. The baby gurgled, reaching for Jesse's weathered face with hands that held the future. "What will we tell him about where he comes from?" James asked. Clara and Jesse exchanged glances, a lifetime of communication in a look. "Tell him," Clara said, "that he comes from warriors. Apache warriors who survived removal. Boston warriors who defied society. Warriors of the heart who chose love over fear. Tell him he carries many bloods but one spirit. The spirit of those brave enough to say, 'I choose you,' when the whole world says choose sides." The photographer captured that moment, 4 generations under the desert sunset, testament to the power of love to transform not just 2 lives, but entire communities. The portrait would outlive them all, speaking to generations yet unborn about the courage required to build bridges with your very existence. As the celebration continued around them, Clara and Jesse slipped away to the hill overlooking town. There, in the spot where they'd once met in secret, afraid of discovery, they sat openly, hands entwined, watching their legacy dance in the streets below. "I came west to escape my life," Clara mused. "Instead, I found it. I lived between worlds, belonging to neither," Jesse added, "until you showed me how to make our own world, a good world, the best." They sat until stars emerged, the same stars that had witnessed Apache ceremonies and Boston prayers, that had guided escaped slaves and immigrant wagons, that would shine on whatever America was still becoming. "No regrets?" Jesse asked, echoing his question from decades before. Clara laughed, the sound carrying across the desert like bells. "Only one, that we have just one lifetime to love in. But oh, what a lifetime it's been." Below them, Whitewater glowed with lanterns and life. A town transformed by the simple, radical act of 2 people refusing to let blood matter more than love. Their story would ripple outward, through James's legal work, through Ruth's schools, through the book Clara would finish just before her peaceful death in the bed she'd shared with Jesse for 40 years. But this night, they were simply Clara and Jesse, watching their revolution dance, knowing they'd won the only victory that mattered, the right to love, to be, to exist fully as themselves in a world they'd helped make ready for such love. The desert wind carried the sounds of celebration, of children playing across color lines, of music mixing traditions, of America becoming what it had always promised to be, a place where all are created equal, where love is the only law that matters, where a Boston lady and an Apache warrior could build a life that changed the world, under the eternal stars. Clara Whitmore Redhawk leaned against her husband and whispered, "I was so wrong about wanting gentle. Thank God for wild. Thank you for joining us around the Wild West Campfire for this tale of love conquering all. Where are you listening to this story from? Drop a comment below and let's connect across the miles. just as Clara and Jesse connected across cultures. Don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Campfire for more stories that capture the untamed spirit of the American frontier. Share your thoughts. Did Clara and Jesse's courage inspire you? What would you have done in their shoes? Until the next time, partners, keep your fires burning bright and your hearts open wide.